Hi, everyone. I'm Denise O'Malley. I'm the founder of You Define Wellness, and welcome to week 2 of the Defining Wellness Confab. We're kicking it off with a panel discussion today about crisis in the workplace. And I am really excited to bring this panel to you because we know that when crisis hits the workplace, the first thing an employer is told to do is bring in the counselors. And that's a really good thing to do, but there's more. And today that's what we're going to pursue, is talking about crisis and the impact of physical and emotional trauma on the body. So joining me today are, I have 4 panel participants. They're all in the You Define Wellness Network. Sierra Frost, Kimberly Hedden-Welch, Julie, Julie, I should have asked you on pronouncing your last name ahead of time. Korotkin. Korotkin, yay, and Robin Miner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of them in turn to introduce themselves and what it is that they do. And since I could just bastardize your last name, you get to go first.
Great. Thank you, Denise. It's really lovely to be here. And yes, I'm Julie Korotkin. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I also hold an MBA. I live in Denver, Colorado, and the name of my company is Evolved Journey. And I co-create transformation with young adults who are anxious and scared and confused and want a really awesome life and don't know how to get it. And after working with me, they become confident, clear, focused, and empowered people.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Kimberly.
Hi.
Hi.
Let's see. I am a sound healer, Reiki master teacher, a psychotherapist by training, and my business is Lightbody Holistic Healing. And I also am the program director for Life Spark Cancer Resources, the nonprofit that provides Reiki and healing touch to people with cancer.
Yeah, an organization we absolutely support. Sierra, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Sierra Frost. My business is Invitation Wellness. I work with people who usually identify with having some sort of trauma they're in recovery from, and want better relationships and ways to process emotions, to use them as empowering tools instead of things that create depression or anxiety. And I really work with the body, the spirit, and the mind all together. Also, because we're talking about this, I work with organizations who want to set up their employees, and especially their leaders, with tools to be able to have uncomfortable conversations around topics that we don't often talk about or understand, like crisis or mental health.
Awesome. Robin, it's your turn to introduce yourself.
And I see you just staring there, Denise, but my screen kind of went blank. So maybe you just introduced me and I don't have any idea. My internet connection is so bad right now. I'm sorry.
Well, let's get you through your introduction.
Okay. So I'm Robin Miner, and I am a registered psychotherapist in Denver. And my business name is pretty much my name. And I am a body-centered psychotherapist and focus on embodied psychotherapy. So working with body, mind, spirit, integrating everything. I work with really all issues, but because my training that I work with the most is sensory motor psychotherapy, trauma is an essential part of what we work with, both developmental trauma as well as shock trauma. Mm-hmm. Shock trauma is more of what we're talking about today, but developmental trauma can play into how we deal with a shock trauma. So both pieces are relevant. Yeah, I don't know that I need to say any more than that.
You're good. You're good. One thing I'm going to add is it was after a conversation that I had with Robin a little over a year ago that we started talking about what more we can do in the community and helping the workplace after a crisis has hit the workplace, that we started the formation of something called the Holistic Healing Workplace Crisis Support Team that we'll talk about a little bit more towards the end. So glad to have all 4 of you with me, glad to have our audience participants as well. And as I had mentioned before we hit record, if you have a question, just please put it in the chat box and I will get with it. So one of the reasons I wanted to put together this crisis panel is to talk about what happens, as I said in my intro. An employer is told to bring in counselors after a crisis has hit the workplace. And, one of the questions is what kind of crises am I talking about? Well, living in Colorado, we've had a few workplace crises that have hit national news, as other communities have as well. We're not the only one. We don't get free reign to declare that as our own thing. And, we've had within the schools, which is a workplace, we've had it in theaters, which is a workplace. So it's also dealing with the community as well. So my question to the panel starting out is, what happens, let's just dive into the deep end of the swimming pool. What happens when a crisis, somebody has gone through a crisis, whether just individually or at the workplace, and they say, oh, I'm fine, and they just deal with it? What's the ramifications? Who wants to jump into that one first? And you all don't raise your hand at the same time.
Okay, I'm happy to jump in.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
Sure thing, sure thing. Untreated crisis, it has such a huge impact on so many levels. There's a physical impact. We can store trauma in the body. A lot of women, for instance, store trauma in the hips. It's just, this emotional seat, and we kind of keep things there. And so that's one thing, which ultimately can lead to a sense of anxiety in general, lots of symptoms of post-traumatic stress. If that trauma just stays with you and you never process it and let it go. If you're young and it happens, you can stay stuck developmentally and present like a teenager, even if you're, in your 30s or 40s, for instance, when something in your environment triggers you. And so I think that, it shows up in relationships and the way you communicate and the way you handle difficult times as you go forward in your life. And by holding it, you may not even know that it's stuck there. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anybody want to add to that?
I want to add to that. Great job, Julie. And then over time, it could have a whole bunch of other ramifications, right? It could create disease. It could create pain in specific parts of your body. And since we're talking about the workplace, it also creates this environment with lots of potential triggers, so that whether it's a physical trigger or a specific word, or even the lighting, or your coworker looks like a certain person that looked like when that crisis happened, huge emotions then come up, and they feel exactly the same as they did when they were stored. So that crisis moment, it's almost like time travel. Your brain, that's what happens. And you're time traveled back to that space, and then it's really easy for us to be defensive, to explode. So it affects our workplace culture, our workplace relationships, our productivity, pretty much everything that goes into the environment of a healthy and effective workplace.
Robin, you wanted to jump in on that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say some of the things Sierra said, which were great. I was also thinking that trauma is absolutely stored in the body and can come out sideways in terms of things like dreams and nightmares, intrusive thoughts that people are going, what the heck is that about? And also in terms of body sensitivities that people might not understand, like why can I not be touched, or why do I have sexual issues? That people might not understand, that might not be directly related to the trauma, but can still come out in that way, because that's what trauma does. It comes out indirectly.
Kimberly, you want to chime in?
So to follow up with what everyone else is saying as well, how it appears to be as an energy healer, it's kind of like our nervous systems are a record. We've got grooves going around, and when trauma happens, that instance kind of creates a skip. And so the activation in our nervous system, the basic definition of trauma is anything that our body cannot handle in the moment. It goes outside of our experience, outside of our realm of being able to process and understand it. So it just keeps looping, as it were. And so in the workplace, if you've got one of those loops, it's like you're not fully present and listening and attentive to what's going on, because you've got this skip going on. Like Robin was saying about having storylines and words going in your head that may be triggering and interactive in other situations there.
Yeah, somebody described it recently to me like a spiral. So when every time you do a revolution and you come back to the blip of the whatever the event is, you're going to feel it again. But it, the hope is eventually that the more you go around and around and around, it'll become less and less and less, unless you're not getting nourishment. And just like the rings on a tree, if it didn't get enough water, they're back to back, as opposed to having a little padding and buffer from the last go round.
And another thing is when I get clients in wanting to deal with trauma or wanting to deal with these symptoms they don't understand, they're feeling often shame and guilt and what's wrong with me about these symptoms and wanting them to go away. And I think it's really important to understand that these things keep coming up because they're wanting to be resolved.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to let people know that these things are wanting to be resolved. The reason they're coming around again and again and again is because they're trying to come out. They're trying to get resolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So none of you have mentioned something that I really am a little surprised about, and yet you're going to be going, well, of course it is, Denise, silly. And that's addiction. Mm. And the coping mechanisms people have to numb themselves from the original trauma. To me, that's a serious issue, isn't it?
Of course, Denise.
We just recently, living in the community where Columbine happened, there was a student at Columbine, now adult, who just committed suicide a few months ago. And it was because, and one of the things he said is he fought addiction because he, as a teenager, turned to alcohol after that event because he needed to numb from the pain. So, okay, I just got goosebumps.
Right, I did too.
Yes.
And
yes.
Can I just say something there? Drug use oftentimes brings us to situations that have trauma surrounding them. And so not only the substance itself keeps us stuck in that trauma place, even though it feels like perhaps we're not, oh, I'm good, I'm high and I don't feel it, but it actually keeps it held in the body even longer. Mm-hmm. And over time, more and more substance use does expose you to more trauma. And so it just continues that layering pattern. And like you said, those rings on that tree is not growing, it isn't. And in the workplace, it shows up as conflict. It shows up as low productivity, lack of focus, lack of motivation, calling in sick. Like it can really impact the bottom line for any organization. Mm-hmm. And it's sad and it's scary. And there's so many solutions though, right? There's tons of ways to address these kinds of things and help people, like Robin said, grab this opportunity when that trigger shows up. It is an opportunity to process and to move beyond where you were stuck. So
you're a perfect segue, I got to tell you. And we really didn't plan it that way. You talked about solutions. So you're all on here because I know you all have different solutions of things that you can do to help someone both immediately after a trauma has happened or a crisis has happened and down the road when it was left untreated. So I'd like to hear your ideas. What are some things that we can do? So I'm going to go the most unconventional, simply because she's got the gongs behind her. So let's talk about your approaches, Kimberly, and some of the things that you recommend bringing in.
Okay. So one of the reasons I do have the gongs behind me, I also use singing bowls and tuning forks. I'd started my therapeutic path as a psychotherapist, and it still informs the work that I do, but I feel like I get there from a different way. So I'm looking very much at the nervous system arousal and using sound to get someone out of their sympathetic fight or flight into the parasympathetic rest and digest. And oftentimes from that place, then we can start unpacking if they've got layers of shame over having the trauma or having used substance to try to numb. Or so it seems the very basis of what I do is getting to that rest and digest out of the parasympathetic. Yeah, and then it sounds nice. So
What are some of the other approaches? Sierra, you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, I do, and I am feeling really pulled to backtrack just a little bit.
Okay.
So Austin Eubanks is the name of the Columbine survivor who recently passed.
Yes.
And I think that's important. Something that's really important about his story to all of us on this call, and anyone who's listening will probably relate to this, is he dedicated his life to this work. I met him last summer, actually, speaking and saying many of these same things that we're talking about today. And at the beginning of his story, his treatment was, he had physical trauma, and so they gave him painkillers, and then he became addicted to those. And then the story goes on. But even years later, even when he's in this space of doing this work, of knowing everything that he knows, of being so connected to this community that's doing healing work, he was still being impacted. And so I just want to give space for a moment that we never know what someone else might be going through. And they can be the most trained person, they can be the most calm person in the workspace that you are with, and this still could be impacting them. So I just want to say that there's no discrimination when it comes to trauma and to crisis.
Thank you for that, and thank you for honoring by saying a more correct version of his story. I had forgotten that you had met him.
Yeah, no problem. But to your point of like addiction, something else that comes to mind is that crisis, untreated, creates a cycle, not just for us, but to other people. There's secondary trauma. And so it's almost like within any group of people that you bring together, there's all these other experiences that are coming, these other experiences that aren't being integrated, like Kimberly mentioned. Trauma is really just anything that we can't handle in the moment. And so we all come together with different experiences of that, and then they play out in this group. And so one thing that I really want to hit on is prevention. Is that, like, one of the things that I teach is called mental health first aid. It's a nationally certified program, just like first aid CPR. Tons and tons of people, employees, healthcare, social workers, law enforcement, 911 responders are all mandated to be trained in first aid CPR, but they're not mandated to be trained in mental health first aid. And I have worked with all of these types of organizations and professions across the board, from teachers to healthcare workers, even psych ward, hospital nurses. And every single one of them comes back and says, this is the most important training that I've ever had, like in my schooling and in anything else. Because why are we waiting for a crisis to happen when we can potentially catch red flags and I'm not saying that everyone needs to be a counselor. That's not safe. I'm not asking you to like diagnose people or treat people yourself. But what we can be is the bridge. We can give initial help and support to people so that they're able to access and understand, because we're talking about alternative health modalities, that there's more out there than only taking pills, than only seeing a talk therapist, and to bring them to a resource like You Define Wellness to say, hey, there are so many people out here who can really match your interests, that can give you support, that can help you in ways that that maybe are a better match for you, and they care and it matters and you're not alone.
You know, I was at the National Summit for Mental Health and Mental Fitness yesterday. It was the inaugural launch of it, and a couple hundred mental health from coming in from various places, from law enforcement, first responders, the education system, the policy decision, and the workplace. You know, so there was all these different modules that were going on, and they asked in the big group session how many in the room had taken the mental health first aid course, and there were actually very few people in the room who raised their hands. So we definitely want to put on an event sponsored by You Define Wellness and have you teach that. So we want to make sure that we can get that in, because you're absolutely correct. And prevention, I think, is very much the key. And people are like, well, how can you prevent a crisis? You can change your response to the crisis. Am I correct in saying that? Okay, because I'm a reformed insurance agent. I'm not one of you guys.
Yeah, I would love to give an example, and then I'll get some space for other people. But so one organization that just hired me to do a training with their employees is the Budweiser Event Center. And one of the reasons for that is, so there's a story that somebody else personally told me that sort of led up to that connection. And it is that they were at a festival, like a music festival, and they were sober. But just to add more information, like, you know, other people, they might be on drugs, they might be having these adverse experiences or reactions. And what happened to her was she became overwhelmed and she started to have a panic attack. And she was able to even go up to some of the employees at this event and say, I need help. I was trying to move my stuff and I'm having a panic attack. She was crying, she was hyperventilating. And the response that she got was, well, everyone has to move their stuff to their car. Everyone has to do that. We can't help you. That's not part of our job. Someone having a panic attack is a crisis.
Yeah.
And if someone was having a heart attack, if someone came up, bleeding with blood that wouldn't stop from the arm or something like that, the response would not have been, that's not my job.
Thanks.
And so that's not okay.
Yeah.
And so even in these situations, you can sometimes prevent a crisis, not always, but sometimes you can, and then you can learn how to respond better and maybe stop furthering the cycle.
Fantastic. I'm going to go to the other side of my screen here. Julie or Robin, you want to chime in on anything?
I'm happy to. I think, we can't prevent a crisis from happening, but like you said, you can prevent how you can change how you respond to it. And I think really the key there is preparation. Having knowledge, tools, and resources in place so that if something does occur, you know how to go forward. And sure, like I'm considering like my husband's company, for instance, it's a web-based organization and it's a bunch of tech geeks and a couple of managers. And if there was a crisis there, I'm not really sure, how they would handle that. And I think it's imperative for leadership to learn some basic skills, and even just some basic skills in, okay, let's all come together. We're going to set an intention, for instance, which is something that I do in my work, so that we can all move through this together as a team and make it a unified effort. That's one thing. And I think another thing is just simply having paperwork resources. Like, here's a list of places that you can go to get help. Here's some reading materials, or here's a quick video to watch, things to watch out for yourself if you start to have symptoms, so you can go and get the help you need. And really serving as a resource to the workplace environment will do that preventative work from everything tumbling into total crisis after trauma.
Robin, I'd like your thoughts.
Well, so as a psychotherapist, clearly I'm working at the end where something's already happened. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to talk about what I do?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So what I do with people. So recognizing that with a trauma, the two most significant pieces contributing to somebody feeling that a trauma has happened are feeling that there's a lack of agency and feeling that they're alone.
So what do you mean by feeling like there's a lack of agency?
So feeling that they couldn't do anything, or that they, so there's lack of orientation, like they didn't see it coming, or that they couldn't do anything about it, that they were helpless. That, combined with the sense of I'm alone. Those are typically the two things that contribute most to somebody feeling that there was a trauma, right? Because two people can go through the same experience. One comes out feeling like it was a horrible experience, but it wasn't a trauma. And the other person is traumatized. Those two elements, I couldn't do anything about it, and I was alone, that's what typically goes into the sense of this was a trauma. So when I'm working with somebody, I'm typically working with those two pieces. Now, as a psychotherapist, the sense of I'm with you, I'm here with you, you're not alone.
I think Robin just froze.
She is frozen.
And she, there she is again.
Okay.
And you're muted. You're muted.
Okay. I'm going to wait and see if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm back. So isn't it interesting that I went away just then when I'm talking about I'm with you? Oh, symbolism is right.
Exactly.
So that sense of building relationship is really important. And in trauma, that's really key, is I have to be with you. So that's a very important element. I'm a body-centered psychotherapist, so we're not talking. Talking doesn't work. Trauma lives in the body. So we're getting into processing the body reaction to the trauma. Now, this is not something I would recommend people do out on the streets, but that's what I do as a psychotherapist, is we might be working with shaking. So people understanding that somebody's shaking after a trauma, and this might happen on the scene, somebody's shaking. That's actually a really positive response. That's our animal body shaking off an experience. That's our nervous system going, ooh, that was scary. That was, whoo.
Yeah.
So people understanding that's actually a good thing, is that's part of education. That's part of, yeah, let that happen. Let that just move through. That's part of us not being scared of our animal body getting rid of an experience. So that's part of what I do as a therapist, is helping people understand, yep, that's your body moving that through. Let's let that happen. So that's what's called sequencing. That's what we let happen, is we let our bodies move something through. Another piece that I work with is orienting, having the client notice, oh, wait, my head wants to go over there. And letting that happen in a really conscious way is orienting to something happened. And allowing the body to process that means that the body gets to do what it couldn't do at the time of the trauma. So maybe something happened and I didn't get to look over there and see, oh my God, there's a car coming. And it hit me. But now I get to take the time to really feel all my muscles move over there, and I get to complete that action, and now my body is complete with it. And so my nervous system has now processed that orientation response, which is what it needed to do. The trauma response may now be complete. That may be all that needed to happen.
Yeah.
There may be more, but that may be the thing that was incomplete. There may be a defensive response, like fending off a blow or punching somebody, and we may enact that. Those are things that I do with clients, very physical, very much in the body, to complete responses that were not allowed for whatever reason to happen. It may be that we were very small at the time and our attacker was very big. So there was no way. we could complete a defensive a defensive response against somebody who is 4 times our size.
Mm-hmm.
So we can do that in therapy and complete the response that's still in our bodies being held on to, but that wants to come out, wants to complete. Once we do that, once our nervous system gets that out,
Mm-hmm.
our world may be different. And then the emotions that come with that have a chance to release. And then we do that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
And then everything that was held as a result of that can unwind. And what was somebody who was living from maybe a child state, so now I'm reverting to maybe something happened in childhood. Maybe somebody who is living from a child state now can come from an adult state.
I think it's important for us to...
Frozen. There you go. There you are.
Okay, well, I think it's important for us to, and after I say this part, Julie, then I'm going to go to you and hear about what you do, okay? But I think it's important to understand, for those who are watching this video, that when we're talking about crisis or trauma in the workplace, it doesn't have to be big. It can be small. And I was talking with a former retired human resource manager about the crisis support team that we're putting together. And she shared with me 3 instances in her workplace, which was a really big company back east, where they needed help for their employees. One was after a hurricane, and a lot of them had lost everything that they had, and that was brought into the workplace, those emotions, those feelings, and they were all experiencing them. One was they had an employee who died at his desk of a heart attack, and that was a form of crisis and trauma, because they're all going through that is a horrible thing. They had another one an employee who was killed by her partner of a domestic violence situation. And there were employees who knew that this was going on, but they hadn't said anything. So they had this guilt going on when she was killed in the apartment complex that she lived at. Recently we've had a couple of instances where we've already been called into service, even though we weren't ready. One, like a week after we announced we were going to do this crisis support team, where an 8-year-old boy had committed suicide over the weekend, and the staff at his elementary school just were not able to deal with this. How it was terrible. And another one where a longtime employee lost his battle to cancer, and the employer just wanted grief support, and they didn't know what they wanted when they contacted me. And so it's kind of crazy and confusing, and we weren't quite ready for it either. But we brought it back to that they need grief counseling, and to do a group activity with the remaining employees to memorialize them. But the whole point is that it could be a big crisis, like a workplace shooting or a hurricane or something else, or it could be something minor where they're not even there, but when Robin, you're talking about turning your head because you heard of an accident, it's the reaction when they're reliving the moment they heard about the crisis, and then their memories of the person as well. So it always varies. So Julie, I want to go to you now, and because we haven't talked about exactly what it is you do in helping people in these type of situations.
So, I think my work happens through a lens of holistic well-being. And you've seen my model, and it really helps people examine themselves and their own lives from a really balanced sort of 10,000 foot view of that internal world and the external world. And so in this case, in the workplace case, I would use that lens to help people find their strengths first, and really look at, okay, where am I solid and grounded in my world right now? And how can I use this to help uplift me up and out and through my healing process of whatever that trauma may have been, whether it's big or small. So as an example, let's say there is a workplace shooting, and I'm a person in the workplace. I look at myself and I say, I have a really strong sense of spirit. My mental health is pretty good. And the environment in my home is a peaceful one. And so how can I use those three things to help bring people together, to help us come together as community and get together in a way that we all meet each other at our pain point so that we can then move forward. And so perhaps that includes even bringing someone home to my house or bringing my team home to have that conversation. It could also look like, creating an event at work that involves maybe some conversation, learning some deep breathing techniques, getting really clear on how we can all come together with each of our strengths from this holistic viewpoint to uplift our community and really begin to resolve this collective pain that we're all feeling. I think that the community layer of my model is really significant in the workplace, because if there's disjointed relationships there, that's a big piece that needs to be worked through in a time of crisis and pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So let's talk, because the remaining time is going to fly by here. Let's talk about briefly some prevention things to give people coping skills before something ever happens. We've mentioned the mental health first aid. And then I will have one more question about immediately after an event happens for all of you. But let's talk about prevention. What are some of the things that, say, somebody can do for themselves, or an employer can do for their employees before anything happens and maybe nothing ever happens? We talked briefly, but I want to consolidate it in one. Who wants to jump on this? Okay, so
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sierra?
Yeah, so ways to be preventative. One way to be preventative is, if you are a person of power, of leadership, maybe you are a manager, maybe you're a CEO, maybe you just lead a team, or maybe you're just a person that people tend to look up to. You can start by talking about subjects that might be uncomfortable. So like, even if nothing has necessarily happened that you need to address, but bringing up topics in a specific way. So maybe a person like in law enforcement or social work, or even healthcare, teaching, education. These are environments that a lot of secondary trauma happens. And by secondary trauma, I mean like the people that they're serving are coming in, they're hearing stories of trauma, kind of like what Denise was just talking about, or they're seeing it in their homes. They're the first people to respond to it. And so making yourself accessible, letting people know, I'm willing to have an uncomfortable conversation. I'm willing to hold space, either one-on-one, or as a group, providing those times. So really having staff meetings that are valuable, that are actually talking about, not skirting around it, but actually talking about it. I can't tell you the amount of organizations that I've worked for. I've worked for almost all of those fields, and the amount of times that we give lip service to something like resilience. Resilience is a big word that gets thrown around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was always the person in the meeting like, hey, remember how we're going to do that program about resilience for the employees? When is that going to start? And it was like, we just kept talking about the word resilience, but we never actually had that space.
Yeah.
And then bringing people in, like you could, using our network to do like lunch and learns, or to bring people in and have talks, to really be able to experience like breath work with Julie, or some sound healing with Kimberly, or some shaking with Robin, or all of these things, and I'm relating to doing really similar work as they're describing, but we can learn some tangible skills, and even taking the first 3 minutes of a staff meeting to introduce a mindfulness practice, which could be breathing, which could be orientation, observing, which could be movement, bringing in a yoga class, even giving out, like asking a yoga studio to sponsor some classes, or, you know, giving out some free things, making it accessible, asking your employees, why isn't this accessible to you? And then taking away those barriers to access, whether it's discomfort of, I've never talked about that before and I don't know how, or I can't afford it right now, or I need an employee wellness plan built into my workplace so that I can access acupuncture or somatic psychotherapy or whatever our insurance isn't covering, or just education.
It's good. It's really good. You covered all the bases that I wanted covered.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, other people also have valuable ideas.
Well, they do. Anybody want to add to that at all? Because that was pretty comprehensive. Yeah. You know, yesterday at the summit, I have to say, I was really blown away by it. This was a summit put on by the International Association for Human Values and the Art of Living. And they brought in presidential candidates, which was really interesting, some leaders in industry, business, leaders in mental health education, you know, like Yale University and some other top-line schools. It was just a lot of thought about mental health. And the one thing that they all had in common pretty much was mindfulness practices, meditation practices, and breathing practices. And it was really comforting to me to hear this direction going. And I wasn't expecting it. I was really expecting it to be a little dry, and part of it was, but it was really nice to hear that this is the thought movement and going forward. So in the last couple minutes that we have here, before I get to go into talk about the Holistic Healing Workplace Crisis Support Team and You Define Wellness, a crisis happens, a trauma happens. What's the first thing somebody should do? Besides panic. We don't want them to panic. Breathe, probably. Okay, so that question, I probably stumped it. What would be the value of, particularly, let's say, Robin's ready to go, it looks like, to answer that question.
My first thought is get help.
Yeah.
Don't do it alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
The doing it alone and this idea that we have to do things alone is going to contribute to a traumatic response. So get help.
And the fact is that to underscore that is when you're in the midst of it, you're not thinking very clearly.
Right.
Yeah. You may think you are, but you're not thinking really clearly.
Right.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why this client of mine reached out to me when they found out that this longtime employee was going immediately into hospice. They just didn't know what to do. Yeah. Okay. Any other addition to that? Okay. You each get 1 minute for closing thoughts up to. So Julie, want to start with you? Any last minute words that you want to share?
You know, I think if someone has been through trauma or there is trauma in the workplace, really getting, and this has been sort of the theme, is that connection to the body and connection to the breath, and really bringing your awareness to getting really grounded and inside of yourself is the first place to start. That's where I would go. Yeah.
Sierra.
Yeah, I want to give a little bit of permission. This might sound funny, but I don't care. When a crisis happens in that moment, it's totally appropriate to feel like you don't know what to do. It's totally appropriate to feel like you want to run away, to feel like you need to fight, to feel like you need to freeze. Sometimes it's even the best thing that you can do to keep people safe. Sometimes you need to fight. Sometimes you need to get away in that moment. And so when we're talking about all of these really healthy ways to process trauma, but those don't happen in the moment that the trauma is happening.
True.
They happen later on.
Mhm.
So yeah, I agree with what Robin said. Like, get help, and then once you can start to process it, then start to process it.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I would say is just that I don't really know a single person who doesn't have some form of trauma, right? Like stress is a part of life, and it it could happen just waiting for the bus on the street, could happen driving your car, and so there's this piece that we touched on today of shame and loss of control, and those are things that are true for any form of trauma, no matter where it comes from. And so I just want to give also permission to understand that we are all in this together. And I think the conversation that's happened today, and the panel that is come together, you can feel the I want to say excitement about trauma. It's not excitement about trauma. It's excitement about helping people.
Yes.
About reducing trauma and being able to move through it, because it's part of a human experience. And we're not the only ones out there either. So there's so many people here with you if you are feeling like that's impacting you or impacting your workspace. And we're with you.
Yeah, awesome. Kimberly.
Just loving what everyone else has been saying, and I really feel that piece of permission and empowerment, that however you respond to that trauma in that moment is the intelligence of your body, the intelligence of your system. And when trauma is happening, I mean, seek connection, seek safety. Those are the basic pieces, and then moving from there. But.
Thank you. Robin, last thoughts? Oops, you're muted.
I kept going away. What was the question?
The last thoughts. Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to add to this discussion?
No, from what I did hear, well, yeah, yes, of course. From what I was hearing about people, that I just really appreciated that when trauma happens, it's about fight, flight, collapse, and we do what we have to do. Mm-hmm. And I just really appreciated hearing people acknowledge that we do what we have to do when a trauma happens. And I just think that's so, I really appreciate hearing people say that. We do what we have to do, and we need to acknowledge that. And applaud people for doing what they have to do, and encourage people to find safety, and encourage people to connect with their bodies, because that's where the ultimate grounding and hopefully safety will be.
Yeah, thank you for that. So this is the point of the conversation where I get to talk about what we're doing and You Define Wellness to help with this. And really this whole idea of having a holistic healing workplace crisis support team, as I mentioned, it started with a conversation with Robin, and it's grown from there. It really came from, we have a network of hundreds of health and wellness professionals in our network that are passionate about giving back to the community and wanting to be available to be of service.
No, not master.
I'm going to mute Robin there. But they want to be of service in the community, and when they need it the most. And so one of the things we knew is that we could be of service at time of crisis, when something is happening at the moment. And so we can have the capacity to bring in one person or many people, many different modalities, to introduce employees to different things that they can be doing to help get through the crisis. It's not, when we bring in a team of people, we're not solving the problem. We're helping them see that there's going to be a path available to them. And as I mentioned, the very first thing that we got called into was an elementary school to be of service to the employees. And who called us in was actually a parent. Who was very active and was wanting to put together food for the teachers and the staff. And she said, I want you to bring in a group of people to help out because the teachers and staff, they don't know what to do. And while the school district brought in the counselors, they just knew that they needed a little bit more help. So we were able to bring in, I put out the call to our folks. I had 28 people immediately signed up. We had to whittle it down to about 8. We brought in chair massage, acupuncture, Reiki, energy healing, biofeedback, and of course the psychotherapists and the counselors. And that we were able to be of service. And it was so gratifying to me in a very weird way of thinking about this sometimes when you're talking about crisis. But it was very gratifying to me within about a week or two after the event. One of the employees contacted me and said, hey, you know what, I am really dealing with a headache. I can't get past it. What was the name of that acupuncturist? I want to go see them. And so what we did is we opened the employees' eyes to other things that they can be doing for self-care for themselves. So these type of things do not grow. They just don't magically appear. We are actually going to be rolling our holistic healing workplace crisis support team into a nonprofit so that we can do apply for grants and fundraising, so that when we can bring when a crisis hits, that we can bring in a team and not have it be a financial burden on the employer or the community. So that will be spun off as a nonprofit. If this is something you want to see in your community, we need financial support to make it happen. And so we are doing this confab as a fundraiser. So if you're so inclined and you're interested in helping support it, just throw whatever you can towards us. The paypal.me/udefinewellness. All donations are accepted as small or as large as they may be. And so we can get this off the ground faster. Sorry, I'm looking at, okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is You Define Wellness, because you know what? A lot of people don't know who we are and what we're doing. And so I just want to tell you about our network. Our network, there are a lot of provider networks on the internet, provider directories, there's a ton of them. What sets us apart is that we actually vet our providers. I mean, I literally have a private investigator on my team, and we do basic due diligence on them. We're looking for a criminal and background check. We're doing looking at their licenses to see if there's any stipulations or disciplinary actions on it. We are looking, are they a legal business? We're looking at their reputation, and being able to put together this vetted network is really important. While you need to do your own due diligence when you're selecting the providers you work with, you can rest assured that we haven't allowed just anyone to be in our network. And with this network of wellness professionals, we can do so much, including creating this holistic healing crisis support team. We can do things like create an employee benefit program for the marketplace so that an employer can offer this as a way for employees to go use the services that they want. Because some of the providers that we had talking here on the panel, they don't accept medical insurance, nor would medical insurance allow them on. And yet so many people seek out those type of services. So this is an employee benefit program for that. So many of our providers are available as speakers. We have an education catalog for lunch and learns, community resource, school districts, whoever it is that's looking for a speaker on health and wellness, we have a catalog for it. And for those who are not covered underneath our employee benefit program, we actually have a discount savings card that you can also purchase. And through the confab, it is available at half price. It's a one-time fee. You can share it with all the friends that you have, all of your family members, your next door neighbor if you want. Whoever presents that card receives a discount if that provider is participating in the Healthy Living Savings Card. It's a great deal, and we invite you to just go to our website and learn more about it. So for the panel presenters that we had, I want to thank them for being on it. When this is uploaded to YouTube, and when you are going to any recording of ours, it will link you over to YouTube. You will find contact information for every single one of our panel presenters today. If they have resonated with you, I invite you to reach out to them and find out how they can help you, whether it be for a crisis or trauma or for any of the things that they specialize in. So, folks, I know Sierra had to jump off because she had a client. We thank her for being on it. I thank Julie, Kimberly, Robin for joining us. I thank the audience for attending as well. Any last words? Anyone? Going once? Going twice? And for those of you who are watching this recording, I thank you as well. And please check out all the recordings on the YouTube channel that we have. Just search for You Define Wellness in the search bar, and you will find all 48 presentations we're doing during the confab, as well as all the materials and interviews that we've been doing for the past couple of years. And I urge you to use it as a resource for when you're looking for health and wellness professionals and when you're trying to set the direction of your own wellness path. So with that being said, again, thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you on another recording soon.